Agricultural Policy Research Institutes, and NAPRI. It is my greatest pleasure to be your moderator for the panel session today. But before we start, we would like to have some house rules. But otherwise, the dialogue today is going to be very lively because we have esteemed colleagues that are with us who are going to share their insights as a panel. But before we go into the session, essentially there are a few house rules that we would like to communicate to the participants. The first one is that our session is scheduled to last 90 minutes. I don't intend to keep you more than 90 minutes. And to avoid distractions, please leave your microphone muted and just unmute when you have a question or you have the platform to speak. We also have French interpretation, and the button is located at the bottom of your screen. And then in terms of the questions, you can type them in the Q&A chat, and they will be addressed in the Q&A session. So, ladies and gentlemen, today's session is about the future of African policy research institutes in the face of uncertainty, but I want to say there's also in the face of opportunity. It is my pleasure to welcome you to this important discussion on the future of African policy research institutes at a time of considerable uncertainty and opportunity. Over the past 2 decades, African think tanks have emerged as critical players in shaping evidence-based policy making across the continent. Their strength lies not only in the rigorous analysis, but in their deep contextual understanding and ability to translate complex issues into actionable, locally relevant insights. These issues stretch from governance, agricultural transformation to health, education, economic inclusion, and these institutions have really helped to inform and shape national and regional development agendas. Yet, despite this progress, the policy research ecosystem in Africa faces persistent and growing pressures. Chronic underfunding, limited domestic investment, and the disengaged private sector have made it difficult for many institutions to retain talent, upgrade their systems, and sustain their work. These challenges have only been compounded by the recent and significant withdrawal of USAID from the research and programmatic funding across the continent. Ladies and gentlemen, I think we have to be very clear here that the departure of USAID does not only affect African think tanks, it reverberates across the entire ecosystem, including many international institutions whose partnerships and projects depend on this support. It threatens decades of capacity building, collaboration, knowledge generation, both within Africa and beyond. It is in this context that ANAPRI, in collaboration with the Alliance of African Partnership, AAP, has convened this session. We believe that now is the time for us to rethink our models, not simply to survive, but to reimagine what sustainability, relevance, and impact look like in a post-USAID era. Our session today is designed into 2 parts. First, we will hear from a panel of thought leaders and institutional heads who share reflections on the implications of shifting donor priorities and how their organizations are adapting to the situation. We will then move into an open solution-focused dialogue exploring practical strategies ranging from funding diversification and South-to-South collaboration to building stronger public-private partnerships and investing in core institutional capacity. So essentially, I encourage you to contribute actively. This conversation is not just about responding to a crisis. It's about shaping the future of knowledge and policy in Africa. With these opening remarks, I would like to take this opportunity to introduce my esteemed thought leaders and panel. There is not going to be any presentation. We'll just dive in straight into the panel discussion. The first panelist is none other than Professor Dave Shelley, co-director, Food Security Group from Michigan State University, and was the director of the Feed the Future Innovation Lab for Food Security, Policy Research, Capacity, and Influence, PRCI at Michigan State University. And PRCI has been influential in shaping research, capacity building, and outreach in many African research institutions, including ANAPRI. Second, we have Professor Felix Asante, the Pro Vice Chancellor for Research, Innovation, and Development at the University of Ghana. Prior to this appointment, he served as the director of the Institute of Statistical, Social, and Economic Research, ISA, at the University of Ghana. And Professor Asante is a well-renowned researcher in Ghana and in the globe. And let me say, ISA is one of the members of ANAPRI. Third, we have Dr. Gloria Somolikai, who is the Executive Director and Senior Research Fellow at the Botswana Institute for Development Policy Analysis. And this institute provides relevant and timely evidence to guide the government of Botswana in terms of transformation in the country. And last but not least, we have Dr. Jean Muhinda, in short, JJ. So the name is long, but he's a colleague, and the current AGRA Regional Director for East and Southern Africa, and formerly the Executive Director of the Association for Strengthening Agricultural Research in East and Southern Africa, ASERECA. So you can see that we are blessed with really a good team that will reflect on the situation that we are going to have. So we are going to have 2 rounds of questions. I would like to request my panelists to keep each response to not more than 5 minutes. What we will do is, when you see my camera on, that's a gentle signal that 1 minute remains. Unfortunately or fortunately, I'll cut in when time is up. And that's not to be rude, but to ensure we hear from everyone and stay on track. So without further ado, I would like to jump right in into round number 1. And I would like to kick off this discussion with interventions from Professor Dave Shelley. And then I'll move on to Gloria. So, and then colleagues, please allow me to use your first names once in a while. I think the last names may be difficult for me to pronounce, but so it's not disrespectful, but I would like your indulgence to use your first names once in a while. So Dave, given your leadership role in PRCI and long-standing engagement with African policy research, how do you view the long-term impact of USAID withdrawal on African and global research institutes and the policy ecosystem? Over to you, Dave. You have 5 minutes.
Okay, thank you very much, Anthony. If I can also refer to you by first name, that's what I will do. So thank you, everybody. Thank you for your interest in this. I appreciate the opportunity to share some of my thoughts. It can be formulaic to say that any given problem is both an opportunity and a challenge, right? It can simply be formulaic. But I think that in this case, where USAID has been abolished, where we're looking at huge reductions in the U.S. foreign development assistance budget, when we're looking at maybe not as large, certainly, but meaningful, very meaningful reductions among other bilateral donors, when we're looking at perhaps the cancellation of the US contribution to the CG system, right? I think if ever that formula was true, it is now. This is indeed a huge opportunity, but it is also a huge challenge. It's a huge opportunity to finally really move to a truly African led effort, right? Based as Africans wish on partnerships with global, international, American organizations, right? But it's also a huge challenge. And I'm gonna speak to why I think it's such a big challenge. I think the essential reason is that the rules of the game, written and mostly unwritten, of the development industry have been in place for a very long time. And both sides have gotten accustomed to those rules and have operated by those rules. And while there's been many major positive impacts, right? We see it in the health sector. We certainly see it in our sector with so much more capacity for thinking about policy issues, doing data collection, doing the analysis, reaching out to policymakers. We have seen a lot of progress. I think it's safe to say that there's also been dysfunction and embedded dysfunction on both sides of this, right? So I'm going to take one example. It's from the health sector, and I'm taking that example from the health sector because it's so dramatic, and because the health sector has been so big. When these budget cuts happened, a major U.S. university announced that it was laying off 1,900 employees overseas. My question is, why did that university have 1,900 employees overseas rather than working with local organizations, with and through local organizations, and relying on local employees of local organizations much more than it was doing? And I will say that the blame, if you will, goes in both directions, right? In only five minutes, I can only say so much, but I will say this. I'll encourage you all. I'm doing this in about every talk I give, right? I find a very stimulating thinker on this area is Ken Opalo, Opalo. He's Kenyan. He's at Georgetown University. And he talks about, and this is where it's a challenge. I'm sorry, Anthony, you've just come in. Let me just make these points. He talks about elite complacency and lack of collective ambition in contemporary Africa. Some might disagree with that. Some might be offended by that statement, but I think it's worth thinking about. And I will close here with a quote from Jude Moore, who was the former Liberian Minister for Public Works. And he says that external actors have no incentive, inclination, or obligation to imagine an expansive future for you. African governments, African leaders in civil society, private sector, and government need to imagine and need to pursue that. And I will speak later in the next session on what I think this will be in terms of a test of our commitment to and the quality of our partnerships globally. I'll stop right there. Thank you, Anthony.
Sorry for that. My mic was off. Thanks so much, Dave. That was right on 5 minutes. I will not try to summarize what you said, but I think key things are already emerging here. African owned, African funded, and also the issue of uncertainty, yes, but lots of opportunity. So we need to be asking ourselves those questions. How do we solve the problem going forward. So let me turn to Gloria. Gloria, what lessons has your institution learned about balancing independence with financial sustainability in a shifting donor environment? I know that's a mouthful, but we can learn a lot from you. Over to you, Gloria. You have 5 minutes.
Well, thank you so much. I thought I would show my face just to greet everybody, but the audio is muted, so it's fine. What lessons have we learned as BITBA in terms of balancing independence with financial sustainability in a shifting donor environment? Quite a prompt question for BITBA, because since 1998, when Botswana was classified as a middle-income country and donors left the country, we have, as a country, as Botswana, had to be really fending for ourselves. And fortunately for us, BITBA at that time was not as dependent on donor money as a number of other think tanks on the continent had been. One can say that that was a blessing because we were, entirely or predominantly domestically funded. But it had also its own challenges because over time it has proven that research per se and think tank, the concept of a think tank, I don't think it's seen as something which is quite vital and quite primary in the development scene, in the sense that, the budget cuts that we have suffered have literally reduced us to a shadow of what we used to be. I can say more later. But I just want to say something about this idea of independence. Remember, we are a government think tank, and we are only operationally independent in the sense of having to select whatever we are going to research, the themes, etc. But in terms of governance, there is a lot that is laid out by the government that we have to follow. If I just give you a small example, but with huge consequence, as one of the state-owned enterprises, the salary of someone that leads BITBA cannot be higher than the salary of a permanent secretary. And you know that the two jobs do not attract or do not require the same level of qualifications. So you're going to take someone who requires a PhD and to be at a senior research fellow level and make sure that you peg them against the salary of someone who can walk into that position with a much lower qualification. That has had challenges of its own, including the inability of the institute to retain its highly skilled and educated personnel who have had to go for greener pastures. I don't know how many, do I still have 2 minutes left?
Yes, Gloria, I will show myself.
Oh,
You have 2 minutes, yes.
So by that, I mean that the question of independence has been relative. And then secondly, just because we have been funded by the government for a long time does not suggest that we have not had a challenge of shaky financial sustainability. We have come very, very close to being a going concern had we not pushed harder and harder in the consultancy area. And for a think tank, if you focus too much on being a consultancy outfit, then the think tank role suffers, which is where we are at the present moment. So that's really what I can say about the two issues that you raised in the same question.
Thank you so much, Gloria. You did just 4 minutes, which is great. We saved 1 minute there. What I'm hearing is that we need to reimagine ourselves. We need to harness local resources. But of course, there's an issue of independence. You come from a government related think tank, which serves the government, and the issue of independence at times can be questioned. So the departure of USID, are we going to see the more independent, these independent think tanks collapse, or what can we do to really save the day? And I think the other point that you indicated was that I think what we have seen is that most of our think tanks are moving more into consultants, and that is also threatening the why some of these institutions were formed. So I think let's take this a bit further. I would like to invite Professor Asante Felix. And your question is, drawing from your experience at ISA and as an academic leader, could you share examples of how ISA has influenced real policy change and shaped the development agenda in Ghana or in the region? And also, can you say a little bit in terms of how this departure of USID from the development scene has affected your work? You have 5 minutes.
Yeah, thank you so much, Anthony, and thank you also for the opportunity to share my thoughts on the issue that we are discussing. So ISA, or the Institute of Statistical Social Economic Research, is a unique think tank. Why? Because this is a think tank based in a public university. Okay. So as much as we do the think tank activities, we also have to satisfy the academic responsibilities of the university. So for a typical public university where government pays salaries, virtually government doesn't give monies for research. So for a unit like ISA, grant writing is so key to do hardcore research and also move into policy issues. So for ISA, there's a lot that we do to support the country directly or indirectly. In addition to our academic responsibilities, we try to always make sure that the government of the day is on its toe by coming out with discussion papers and coming out with policy statements based on hardcore research. Okay. So even though government doesn't fund us in terms of our research and our advocacy work, our grant writing helps us to get research in areas that are relevant and topical in Ghana, and then try and fashion out policy issues. So typically, ISA, we produce the State of the Ghana Economy Report every year, which we try to tell government its performance and also recommend possible solutions and answers to challenging issues. We also produce the Social Development Outlook, where we look at the social sector also and try to identify some of the weaknesses in the system and point government attention to it. So in terms of funding cut by USID to ISA, yes, it's something that is hitting us, especially when government is not providing resources for research. But like said by David and others, it's an opportunity for us to also be innovative. Okay, so as an institute, yes, without our international collaborators, what next? So we collaborate with quite a lot of institutions globally, and maybe this is an opportunity for us to strengthen with our collaboration with the other institutions. But now let me touch on the university wide because I'm responsible for research and innovation. The health sector, just like David said, is very, very hard hit. So, for instance, in University of Ghana, we have a research center that is more of like an anchor for WHO within the sub-region. So they confirm cases like Bruley ulcer and other diseases within the sub-region. And this particular unit is supported by WHO. And WHO funds that is being used to support this is USAID funds. So currently there's a bottleneck there. We also have challenges with the NIH that's supporting hardcore clinical research. So the university is also suffering in those type of hardcore research. I mean, the only problem that we faced was just the abrupt end, but colleagues are finding innovative ways to either complete the current studies that they are going on. So we find ourselves in a very unique situation. We cannot do too much consultancy because we are based in the university, but we have to find a way of making sure that our research meets global and country needs. So these are my initial remarks. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Felix, for that. I think to move along, I would like to invite our colleague from Agra. We call him JJ, that's Jin. So Jin, from Agra's perspective, how important are local research institutions in supporting evidence-based decision-making and agricultural transformation across Africa? Could you share examples where such collaborations have significantly informed Agra's investments or strategies? And also, if you can touch a little bit about how the departure of USAID has affected some of your grant making. Over to you, Jane.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Anthony, for having me, and greetings from Nairobi to all of you. So good question here. And let me probably start by highlighting that for those who have come across the work we do here at Agra, you must have been probably informed or read about one of the most important work stream or business line we have been pursuing for the last 6-7 years on policy and the state capability as an interface where we engage government. So our intention, our objective behind that particular work stream is really building the capability of state institution to effectively not only design evidence-based policies, but also support implementation. So, and the ultimate goal being to ensure that our national government deliver on their development frameworks broadly, but more particularly on the commitment they have subscribed to through the CAADP food systems as a continental framework. So this is where Agra as an institution, we interface and partner with local, but also regional policy think tanks to really ensure that we deliver interventions ranging all the way from data analytics, evidence generation, data translation, but also policy reform and policy implementation, as I mentioned earlier on. By doing, and pursuing and brokering that type of partnerships, we're also intentional towards strengthening the capacity of these local institutions themselves. It's not just about buying their services, but it's also being intentional as an African institution that we're contributing towards building their sustainability and their capacity. Now, to your question, due to the familiarity, these institutions are built, local experience, and they are very much familiar with the local context. And we see them play a very important role in generating evidence that we need, not only to inform policy reforms, but most importantly, inform program design and program implementation at country level. As you can imagine, an institution like AGRA, we play at policy engagement level, but we do also do design and implement and support funding downstream program investment, which we really try to an extent possible, making sure that they are informed by a strong evidence. Number two, you are very much familiar, I know AAP was involved, that we have just recently launched the next generation of CADAP on focusing really on building sustainable food systems in the continent. And we have been seeing, actually, even from the previous CADAP Malabo, an increasing commitment and determination from our national government towards reporting specifically against the biennial review accountability mechanism. And as AGRA, we jump on that as an opportunity and bring on board some of these local policy research institutions to provide advisory services to national government, because we're seeing a big appetite coming up from the national government to generate quality report, quality data, and make progress towards a number of KPIs, as you know, within the CADAP biennial review framework. Now, to the second part of the question on some examples, I mean, in the last 7 years, personally, and colleagues from the AGRA here, we have been partnering with institutions specifically like Mwapata in Malawi, like Tegemeo in Kenya, where I sit, and others, on advancing specific policies that we believe can be optimized to better use public resources. In this case, I can use the example that the work we've been doing together with Mwapata, Tegemeo, on rationalizing the national input subsidy programs. That's a concrete example. We have several others across the board. Now, the last point I see you have brought your video on the USAID. Let me say that as an institution, from our perspective, we've been affected, but not as much probably as some of these institutions have been affected. But we're also losing close to $40 million. Probably the portfolio is slightly bigger compared to some of these institutions, but that has direct impact on some of the partnership we're having on the ground, not only with national government, but also with some of these institutions. Probably in the next round of conversation, I will come back to some of the avenues we're seeing on probably building, sustainable partnership models that help us continue and sustaining some of these engagement we have with the national think tanks. Let me stop there, Anthony, for now. Back to you.
Thank you very much. I didn't want to scare you, JJ. Just for saying 1 minute left, but otherwise, thanks so much for covering all this ground. We hope, I think we can explore a little bit more in the second round, which we are just going into now. And I think I would follow the same order. I will start with Prof. Shelley again. Dev, there is your second round question. Please keep it to 5 minutes so that we can be able to save time for an open discussion. So in a context of shifting U.S. development priorities, how should U.S. institutions like Michigan State University pivot in their partnerships with African policy research institutions? Over to you, Dave. 5 minutes.
Okay, thank you, Anthony. So I think that what we are doing some pivoting, but we also want to do some doubling down. And what do I mean by that? On the doubling down, what I mean is doubling down on our approach to partnerships, right? We think that the only reasonable way for MSU to work going forward is to do so in close collaboration with our local partners, right? With the leadership coming from those local partners. And frankly, with those local partners deciding whether they want to work with Michigan State University. So we want to put that burden on ourselves, right? To approach all of this with that kind of attitude. So we want to double down on our partnerships. Now, in terms of pivoting, yes, we do have to pivot, right? For now, probably for at least a year, and most likely 2 years, there will be very little funding coming from the US government for this kind of work, right? I will note parenthetically that part of the agenda or part of the thinking that went behind the agenda that's being implemented by this administration was to channel far fewer resources through the for-profit beltway consulting firms and the extremely large international NGOs. So it's possible that with a lower budget, right, there could be more resources available for local organizations, actually, and for those who wish to partner and are willing to partner in an equitable fashion with those local organizations. So that's a parenthetical remark. So, but yes, we are developing strategies to work to reach out more broadly to a broader set of foundations, right? Our group has always had foundation funding, some multilateral funding, some other bilateral funding, but USAID has been very, very important to us. So yes, we're reaching out, developing a strategy to reach out more broadly with a broader set of foundations. We are also reaching out very systematically to private sector, right? We're starting right now with US private sector food companies or input companies and so forth that work in Africa, that work in Asia, but we want to expand that to local private sector. And this then is obviously going to have implications for, the kind of work that we do. So we're going to have to be, very relevant in working with private sector. Yes, we're going to have to appeal to their sense of producing public goods, their long-term perspective on what their own interest is rather than just a short-term perspective, right? But we're going to have to show that with our partners, with AAP, with AAP's members, right? With others that we collaborate with in Southeast Asia and South Asia, that we can actually bring value to the table. So we're going through this process, and what I foresee happening then is as we enter into hopefully dialogues with some new private sector companies, with foundations, that we have ANAPRI along with us, we have other partners along with us, right? And so we just double down. So I think that this is going to be really a test. How good have our partnerships been, and how much does each side of that partnership believe in the partnership, right? I come from the viewpoint that MSU can do better work working really, really closely with local partners. And local partners, though, need to make their own decisions. Do they think that Michigan State University brings enough value to the table to share some of the resources that can be gotten, right? But also then more broadly together, can we expand the level of resources that we're able to access because we show a real value proposition? I think I'm either at or very close to the 5 minutes, so I will stop right there, Anthony. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Dave. You are at 5 minutes, so thank you so much. Here, opportunity, probably more resources going to African institutions. I hear diversification in terms of funding, foundations, private sector. But with private sector, we need to create value. And also, I'm hearing that the decision is with the African institutions. What kind of relationships do you want to create? You are being put in charge to be able to choose who you want to partner with, real co-creation, etc. I think I would like to move on to Gloria. Thanks so much, Dave.
Thank you.
Gloria, this is your second round question. How can African think tanks collaborate more effectively to present a unified front in advocating for sustained support from government and the development partners? You can see this is like a follow-up from what Dave just mentioned, that they want to put African institutions in charge in terms of charting the future in terms of sustainability. Over to you, Gloria, 5 minutes.
Thank you so much. And yes, indeed, he has, covered it so well. In addition to what he just said, I would say that to me, the most important thing that is key is to have clarity of purpose. You know, these think tanks and African research institutes will only be in a position to identify suitable and helpful partnerships if they are clear themselves about exactly what they want to achieve and what needs to be done in their own countries. And then, of course, scan the environment very carefully, who is doing what, where, and where are the best practices, perhaps, that we would like to learn from. And then, as African think tanks, then we would have to partner amongst ourselves. That is, enjoying to pool our human resources together, because a number of these institutions have highly talented, highly educated people, motivated, who are passionate about the development of this continent. Form those alliances and partnerships and come up with projects that you can present to the leadership, various leadership in your country, for them to appreciate what the think tanks would then have to offer. When I spoke earlier, I didn't say anything about USID because where I am in this country, at least at BITBA, we have not benefited. I don't recall benefiting from USID resources. But I believe that there could be think tanks, and there are NGOs in the North that could be interested in joint projects that could collaborate with African think tanks. And that's what we must target in our big research that we want to undertake. I don't want to say that we must put up a united front for perhaps donors to continue funding us. I think what is happening nowadays is a wake-up call. And that is why I am quite happy that in the last 2 years, AAP, together with Michigan State, have facilitated an initiative of Southern African think tanks so that we can come together with SADC, the Southern Africa Development Community. And I believe that if this network is nurtured and it grows, it can also be a big learning point and sensitization to the policymakers in our region on the value of think tanks and how they have to operate and partner with think tanks in the work they do. We shouldn't forget that, use of evidence in policymaking and utilizing the resources of think tanks is a very important imperative in the governance equation in our countries. And if governments are shown what is feasible, if governments see the work, see the results, I believe that over time, the culture of using the evidence generated by these institutions will become entrenched, and our countries will benefit much, much more than they have benefited in the past, when the evidence could be used sometimes and then sometimes just ignored, etc., etc. So I don't want to think about USAID and think about what we can do to approach donors. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gloria. I'm hearing that we need to be relevant to be able to generate that demand, an effective demand. People have to pay for services of these think tanks, but if our work is not of good quality, then we might not be able to interest our governments or even private sector to fund that. So I think one of the solutions is for us to ensure that our work is demand driven, it's good quality, it's delivered on time. And also, I think the issue of cooperation and co-creating. I think it's coming very strong here, both with partners outside the continent, as well as with partners within the continent. I think we can now move on to Prof. Felix Asante. What role can universities play in anchoring and sustaining policy research capacity, especially in the light of shrinking donor support? Over to you, Prof.
Yes, thank you for the question. I think for we in the universities, I mean, we've always been battling between doing your hardcore research and moving it into policy. I mean, this initial shock, yes, policy research capacity, we will so work hard to sustain it because for us in the university, our core mandate, as you know, publish and build, and then move on in your academic career. But I think this is a call for action, and for us in think tanks in universities, I share some of the suggestions given by Gloria that we need to find a way of partnering with other think tanks within the sub-region and on the continent. I mean, partnering also involves quite some communication, understanding, and the ideology behind why the partnership. But I think it's very, very important at this moment that we find a way of partnering amongst ourselves. This will be an opportunity for us to come out with policy documents with shared voice and make it more powerful on the continent instead of for the past few years having it in think tank in Ghana says this, think tank in Botswana says it. But I think if we come forward, we can send our messages out very well. So partnering with think tanks within the sub-region is very, very, very key. Yes, the private sector is key, but certainly there is also a trade-off working with the private sector. What is in for the private sector? And that is where we in the university and research policy think tanks, we have to be strategic as we partner with the private sector. If you are not careful, you'll be carried away with what the private sector was. But the area of private sector is key for us in the university to go in for. Currently, our relationship with the private sector is not what is expected. And I think this is a call for action for us to deepen that relationship. Yes, we also have to do fundraising, but for a typical university think tank, do you have that structure to do that type of fundraising that a think tank outside the university is doing? And that is what means we have to innovate, because our faculty is structured such that they are academic. Okay, so if you are coming to do proper fundraising, we have to innovate and rely on partners who are doing it well outside the university to help. So for universities, yes, policy research capacity, yes, we'll keep on pushing for it, but certainly the interest might go down a little, because certainly if you don't do the policy research, you'll be actively publishing in your area of discipline, which is very, very key. Okay, so I see policy-related research going down, but I'm sure that within a few years, once we pick up, we'll come back to what the expectations. But I think the key thing for us to do is partner with similar think tanks within the sub-region. And also, now there's an opportunity to look at other institutions and other institutions outside the continent who are also doing similar things that we can do. So for us in the university, we are reaching out to similar partners globally with shared vision and shared ideology so that we can partner in the area of research and also moving the research into policy-related issues. Certainly, the role of government is very, very key. And certainly, you know, in a part of once you want to keep the government on tour, there's always a friction between you and the government, and giving funds to support the country is always a big problem. So in a typical environment, whoever is in opposition always supports our findings, and the government of the day doesn't. But when the government of the day goes in opposition, then they come for our report. So it's very, very nice. But we need time to rethink and plan for how we will continue doing our policy research engagements. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof. Asante. Essentially here, I think what I'm hearing is that we need to move our evidence into policy impact for us to be able to draw the resources that we need to continuously be able to generate relevant policy evidence, and partnerships are very key. So we need to invest a lot in meaningful partnerships. We need to collaborate more. I think to sum up this second round and the panel discussion, let me turn over to Jean. Jean, this is your second question. What role can partners like AGRA play in supporting African policy research institutes to build long-term institutional resilience, particularly in areas like talent retention, digital infrastructure, communication, and policy influence? That's a mouthful, but I think it gives you an opportunity, I think, to build on what you said in the first round. Over to you, Jean. 5 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you, Anthony, for bringing me back here in this conversation. Now, let me probably start by saying that luckily enough, and somehow at AGRA here, we had anticipated the current changes in the funding landscape a few years back and embarked into a very aggressive, fundraising and diversification of sources of funding. So which probably puts us in a better position currently compared to the other institutions in the landscape. But what we are seeing, even though I'm saying that, is that even new resources we're tapping into. Somebody was talking about working with foundations and so on, which also AGRA does quite well. Most of these new programs are actually becoming more and more restricted and earmarked. So leaving really a very limited room for opening up partnership and even sustaining some of the partnerships. But today, at least we're still able to sustain some of the collaboration and collaborative initiative we have with the policy research institutions, academic institutions and others across the countries we work with. But we have to fit within the confines of some of the programs. I mean, I can declare here that one of the biggest partnerships AGRA has currently from a funding perspective is Mastercard Foundation. But it has a very strong youth and inclusivity agenda. So any intervention you design, irrespective of the type of partnership you want to engage into, has to have that as an entry point. A good example is the work we're doing together with the FANARPAN today on supporting national government and the member state of SADC on really raising the youth voice and ensuring that youth participation in policy design and policy implementation is important. But going straight to the question, I think Gloria mentioned something that I fully agree with, which we're also exploring as AGRA. We need to partner with these institutions to work together and support demand generation for the work that these institutions are doing. I mentioned earlier on demand for data analytics, demand for evidence, demand for reforms, and so on, working with both government, private sector, and donor organization. One good example I've been seeing over years, Anthony, is that our government are still borrowing. Our government are still investing into bigger development programs, borrowing money from the World Bank, African Development Bank, and so on. And we're seeing an increasing trend where within the design of these programs, there are components that are supporting areas such as technology development, innovation, and so on. That's an avenue that we should be exploring together with some of these think tanks on how can we inbuild resources that support analytics, policy reform, and other form of engagement into this big chunk of money that our government are borrowing. So the same business model could actually apply for the private sector. The next point then, is on institutional innovations. I think we need to start asking ourselves some tough questions in terms of new business model that bring about sustainability. One can ask a question: why are the national government, private sector, and the organization, including AGRA, are we buying services from these global consulting firms? You know, the kind of BCG, Dalberg, McKinsey, and those. So, what are they offering that local think tanks can not offer? So that takes me to the point on talent retention and others. Maybe by attempting to respond to some of those questions, we realize that probably we need more capacity. It's a chicken and egg story. Expensive talent and skills, but which actually helps you also build relevance and generate output that can probably compete with some of those global consulting firms. And the last point I'm making here, Anthony, going back to the institutional innovation, and that talks also about institutional arrangement, we have to start interrogating our partnership models. And give an example, some of the think tanks in the region where I sit in East Africa, Southern Africa, that I support. We know that the RECs, the regional economic communities, needs this type of partnership. What arrangement can we make so that institutions tap into the resources that we're all putting into these regional economic communities and become formalized partnership, other than just being sitting out there and wait for ESC, SADC, COMESA to call for services? I think there are opportunities there, both at national and the regional level, to build models that bring about two things: sustainability and competitiveness, also as compared to these other bigger global service providers. Back to you, Anthony.
Thank you so much, Jean. And this has been a very interesting discussion. Soon we'll be shifting to the question and answer session, an open discussion. But you have brought, I think, a very important point here that in terms of capacity, basically, I think, I've always argued to say that the capacity in Africa is there, but I think it's not well resourced to be able to deliver the services in a way that is satisfying. Why? Because the resources are not enough. If you give somebody $10 and they need the $50 to get the job done, then definitely you're going to get a half-baked cookie. So I have been discussing with our global partners to say, partner with us. You should be able to build capacity, and together we can bring more resources rather than coming to compete with us. So we cannot compete with you because you are, in terms of resources, we have resources disparities. We could be able to do what Dalberg or McKinsey can do if the resources are adequate. I think with that point from my side, I think let me now invite Tony Milanzi to lead the next session. But otherwise, I enjoyed moderating this panel. Thank you. Over to you, Tony.
No, thank you, Anthony, and thank you, our esteemed panelists, for such insightful and stimulating discussion. And just to show you how stimulating this has been, with questions in the submitted by by participants. So the very first one, I think, really goes to you, David. I think that was Jessica saying, is asking about the employees that were laid off. Were they really American? Were they Americans or host country nationals? So you can respond to that from your example. And there's another one that says, what types of think tanks are we talking about? Maybe that should have been the first question, that we should have defined the kind of think tanks or policy research institutes that we're talking about. But more getting deeper, there's another question on capacity. I think maybe this one, Anthony, you can respond to this one too, because your experience, working with USAID projects, you have a much more recent experience. And she says, what is everyone's perspective on focusing on capacity development in the realm of project and fiscal management? Because USAID used US organizations to take on the risk associated with compliance and fiscal responsibility. So, in case of audits, the audits were incredibly demanding, and if any audit issues were found or any expenses were deemed unallowable, that repayment responsibility fell on the US-based prime. So she's basically asking about building capacity in project and financial management. But you could also talk about other kinds of capacity that needs to be developed. There's another question. Maybe I'll So there's another question from Ghana. It says, Prof. Felix Asante cited the case of Ghana where government pays salaries for research and infrastructure without providing much funding for actual research. So the current challenge may actually represent an opportunity to highlight the need for increased domestic funding for research from government and governmental sources. It says, in my view, that will ensure more local influence in setting the research agenda. Any insights from panelists on how to, on advocacy regarding how this can be pursued? So I'll stop there so that we can respond to those questions. Anthony and David.
Dave, can you go? Yep.
Would you like me to go first?
Yes, Dave.
Okay. Okay, so about the 1,900, I don't know if they were local people or international. I imagine that a large number of them were local. But to me, okay, it's good to hire local, but what's best is to work with local organizations and then they have their own employees, right? There is no development without development of local institutions, local organizations, right? And so it is simply, and look, I will admit, when MSU first started working in Africa, we also went in, we set up our own offices, we hired people, we hired local people, right? We do that almost not at all now, right? We partner with local organizations, and I just think that that is the way it has to happen. It's the only way that there's going to be long-term development. I could go on about this, but I'll leave it at that. If I could make one other point, yes, African governments need to step up to pay for these public goods. All right, African governments, African regional organizations, African continental organizations, and organizations like AGRA, which I'm very gratified to see the emphasis on working more through local organizations. I think that's been coming for a while, and I really hope it continues. Let me stop right there. Thank you.
Thanks, David. Anthony?
Yes, no, thank you so much, Tony. I think the question is, it's more of a comment because, yes, indeed, I think there is need for capacity in terms of how to manage donor or grant resources. I think it's something that we really need to emphasize on. And but I think what is required essentially, I think, is to really be focusing on building that capacity. What we have seen is the partnership has always been that most of the resources, if we are to partner, say, with, let me give a crude example, which is Michigan State University, for example. Michigan State University will have an overhead rate of, say, 26 to 30%, even some institutions higher. But for the local institution, they will not be allowed to even go beyond 10%. And that 10% is not good enough to really invest into some of these institutional requirements to build stronger structures for governance. So I think we need, it's important, but I think as we move forward, I think we need to be able to allow these institutions to put a substantial amount of resources to ensure that they do have the financial capacity to run big grants, and also the reporting mechanisms, I think, should also be made simpler. I think working jointly with the donors, I think they could make some of the reporting requirements simpler. If not, then we should partner with the global partners who can make us navigate through that process. So we need to ensure that those resources are met. But however, what we have seen is that most donors and development partners, they have their own preferred institutions. Why? Because these institutions have invested a lot in ensuring that those resources are managed well. So I think if they could do the same to build the capacity of African institutions, then we should see that desire to move towards providing resources directly to the African institutions. Anyone who doesn't then follow the rules, then they don't deserve to receive the resources. I think I'll stop there, Tony. Over.
No, thank you, Anthony.
Yeah, I don't know whether I can chip in.
Sure, please.
Just following up on what Anthony said. Yes, I mean, the overheads, yes, I see the disparities. But for me, for the African think tanks and African institutions, we need to build a governance arrangement in the area of research management. I mean, you need to work hard to get the trust of whoever you are partnering with. And that is an investment. And it seems we don't spend too much time doing that. But the governance in the research management is very, very key for every successful research institute or a think tank. Just touching on the question Gideon raised on the advocacy. I think for most African countries, and including Ghana, we need to follow the approach South Africa as where they have a national research fund. So that is, we can also match whatever funds that are coming. Okay. And this also leads to the rethinking of how we collaborate with partners like MSUs and other things. We need to refashion it, where the cost of the partnership is borne by the unit coming in MSU and then the local institution virtually. So we need to relook at this partnership arrangement. But I think as African countries, we need to set up research funds within the country where think tanks and research institutes can go for either for counterpart funding or go for funds that will be used to support the research agenda of the country. Thank you.
No, thank you so much, Prof. I think you were beginning to address this question about how advocacy. Gideon was calling for advocacy for more for increased domestic funding, and you're suggesting a national research foundation or funding or something like that. And I think Gideon still was with the same line of thought, say, how can we make government appreciate what is being offered and to be more willing to pay the price. So I'll let other people come in, but also there's Duncan is taking us back to the question of capacity building. So his question really is, if not, what capacity strengthening other than financial support would be helpful? So we're talking about funding here and things like that, but he's suggesting that there are other forms of capacity that needs to be strengthened so that our policy research institutes could become more viable and more capable. So I'll put that out there. I don't know who would be able to come in and address that.
Anthony, let me come in at this point, if that is in order. I mean, Tony?
Yeah, please go ahead.
All right, so probably addressing part of that question and also speaking to another question that was raised by somebody called Vincent on the need for a paradigm shift and the shift for African countries to rely more on own resources. So I know today we're mainly focusing on the impact of reduced funding on the policy research institutions. But I also want to recall that the same pressure is happening on the national government as far as limited funding and the resources is concerned. And from where we sit at AGRA, we're seeing an increased need from the government to really prioritize investment where they are putting money, focusing on areas that have higher financial return, higher economic returns in terms of both poverty reduction, livelihood, income, and even employment creation. So from our perspective, we see that as an opportunity because government are also constrained. They want to use the little resources available to prioritize. Prioritization is key. And that can only happen if institutions like these ones we are discussing today can step in and show relevance and generate the evidence we have been talking from the beginning of this webinar here, and making sure that we are increasing our relevance and making sure that our government are investing wisely and are getting returns from the resources that are available. So that is so critical as far as slow shifting towards really relying on local resources and reducing the burden of borrowing. That's a trend we're seeing, and to us it's a challenge, but it's also an opportunity for institutions that we all want to be supporting. Let me stop here. Anthony, back to you.
Excellent. I mean, this is encouraging to hear that there's that shift happening where African governments are beginning to say, let's turn to our knowledge institutions. How can they help us prioritize on our spending? We are out of time for our Q&A. So I'll leave it up. We can stop here now, for now. I'll ask Prof. Kandawire from the Alliance for African Partnership to make his closing remarks.
Well, thank you very much, Tony. Thank you very much, panelists, for your insightful reflections on how, as partners, we might respond to the urgency for strengthening African institutions in the wake of the changing global development financing assistance, from both bilateral as well as multilateral agencies, particularly for the policy institutes. I think that has come out very clear that that port is drying out. I just want to raise 3 points in conclusion. One is I think we need to pay emphasis, and I think this has come out in these discussions, in deepening our engagement with African governments. In my view, I think that's the first the first port of call, deepening that engagement with African governments. But in the process, I think, as we said, I mean, it came out here that we need to demonstrate, though, the value proposition of these research institutes as we engage our governments. Within the same context, I think we may need to begin to really support them as governments. These are innovative financing mechanisms that our governments might actually wish to look at. And this is actually part of the continental conversation we have. Professor JJ, I mean, I must mention that we've been talking to Jonathan Saidi at AGRA to explore how we might jointly begin to support, in our case here in Malawi, how we might support the Malawi government to really look at our domestic innovative financing mechanisms. And we're inviting him to come to Malawi, but in the process, we'd like to discuss at the continental level how we can actually introduce these innovative financing mechanisms of both national projects, but also research institutes. But I think an additional point that perhaps we should have highlighted, it came out, but I think it is really around building coalitions of partners. This is exactly why AAP is there, coming together and have a collective voice that will actually be there to engage donors, but also to engage our own governments. How can we exert that collective voice on our governments and on the international community? And, more importantly, also, as I pointed out, also the private sector, a collective voice in terms of we demonstrating collectively the value addition of, these policy institutes, But again, these collective voices through this building of a coalition of partners has got to take into account a very important point raised around ensuring that the main voice is from Africa, and we've learned this through the CADA process. We've learned this from the current work, on soil health. That the voice must be African, but with the support of our partners from the global north, but let it actually be that localized voice, and this is what also we're hearing in the recent soil health discussions around how we begin to coordinate our research efforts. That's why I'm delighted that ANAPRI is taking this matter very seriously by bringing on board these various research organizations as one collective voice. And so is actually the Alliance for African Partnership in building this collective voice for engagement. Last but not least, I think it's about continuity of these conversations at the continental and global level. One of our challenges is that we raise these important matters and then we don't actually sustain the conversations. How can we sustain the conversations at the global level? And I would like to put it on the table for the consideration of AGRA and also my colleagues from MSU, as well as ANAPRI, and some of the key institutions like ISA, that why don't we actually intentionally target some few strategic platforms where we jointly continue this conversation to persuade the private sector, to persuade the global community that there is value addition that can be put on the table through we strengthening these policy research institutes. So to you, Professor JJ, AGRA, I mean, can we consider perhaps that at the upcoming African Food Systems Summit, we actually put this on the table again, but there would be an intentional effort in engaging some of these foundations which are based in Africa, MasterCard and others, which you're already engaged with, but also engaging the private sector, because that's a very big platform where the private sector are also there, including governments. They're there. How do we sustain that to stimulate that engagement? And more recently, as you may appreciate, there was actually the launch of the next decade of CADAP, and it was actually only 2 days ago when this was launched in South Africa. And one of the agreements is to ensure that annually permanent secretaries or director generals of agriculture across Africa should meet on a regular basis to discuss on progress in moving towards the transformation of African food systems. Can we collectively engage the African Union and AUD and NEPAD and say that we are available to be part of that conversation with these leaders, these bureaucrats, to actually demonstrate the value that we can put on the table beyond, of course, these permanent secretaries in sharing, some of the successes in their own countries, but how can we as researchers put on the table the value that we bring to this agenda on transforming African agricultural food systems. So overall, I would like to, again, to say this has been a wonderful engagement, but let us actually continue the conversation going into the future. And hopefully, we'll join efforts from our end as AAP, we're ready to join those efforts. Again, would like to make this appeal to both MSU as well as AGRA in continuing to provide support, particularly in the area of joint proposal writing, because that's one of the major gaps that we have actually seen in our own institutions. So once again, much appreciated for your participation, and also to the audience, much appreciated for the excellent questions you have raised. We'll be taking this matter forward and we'll communicate with all of you in the near future. Thank you very much. We appreciate for your attendance.